how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering elite colleges panic, reinstate SAT tests as woke students fail. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Axios, some elite colleges are rethinking SAT requirements. And coming from bestcolleges.com, new study suggests elite colleges should reinstate the SAT and ACT tests. The pandemic provided top colleges an opportunity to evaluate admissions without standardized tests. Should they go back to their old ways? Well, of course they have to go back to their old ways, because there are limited spots available, especially in elite colleges. It doesn't do the colleges any good to bring in students that can't make it through the courses. These colleges need to maintain their reputations. It doesn't matter if you have people of certain skin colors or genders or sexual preferences. What matters is that you have a good student body that's effective. And at some point, these people have to graduate, actually learn something, actually make some valuable connections while they're in college, and then be able to be in a position that they can make good money in their careers and then donate money back to the colleges. From Axios, some elite colleges are rethinking SAT requirements. We did a video similar to this a couple of weeks ago talking about Dartmouth. Now it's Yale. Yale is the latest university reconsidering its pandemic-era move to make standardized testing optional, underscoring a debate in higher education over how to best vet prospective students. The correlation between SAT and ACT results and future student success is complicated, surrounded by conflicting research and points of view among school administrators and education advocates. Admissions officers have pointed to varied research on whether test scores or GPA are more accurate predictors of students' college performance and eventual graduation rates. Yale might bring back SAT, ACT requirements in coming weeks after Dartmouth earlier this month reinstated them following MIT in 2022. Yale's undergraduate admissions office, quote, expects to announce a decision on its long-term testing policy in the next few weeks. Full 2024 applications are subject to the test optional policy. So the test optional policy is if you're applying to the college, you can include your test results if you'd like to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. What they started to figure out when Dartmouth did an intensive study was that if you don't submit your standardized test, sometimes you don't get accepted in cases where you would have gotten accepted, and now it's just a complete mess. They're rejecting students who could be qualified, but they didn't submit their test. They're accepting students they shouldn't be accepting. It's a complete ridiculous result. And anyone could have predicted this result. At Brown, a committee is developing recommendations on standardized testing, legacy admissions, and early decisions, said Brian Clark, a university spokesperson. The school's decision is expected in the coming months. Dartmouth cited a research study commissioned by its president that, quote, confirms that standardized testing, when assessed using the local norms at a student's high school, is valuable for undergraduate applications. The testing has also raised questions around equity. Data analyzed last year showed that student scores rose in accordance with parental income per the New York Times. Well, of course, because if the parents are making good money, they can support their children throughout their lives. This is not something new. We already knew this. 14% of admissions officers in 2023 at 200 top schools with test optional policies were considering requiring applicants to submit standardized test scores, according to a 2023 survey by Kaplan. 85% of admissions officers surveyed said they were not considering restarting testing requirements. Only 1% said they definitely were reviving the mandate. More than 2,000 schools have test-optional or test-free policies for 2024 applicants per fair test, an education organization focused on student evaluation. The National Education Association, the largest labor union in the United States, has called for colleges to drop their testing requirements. Because why would you want to have students at colleges that were actually appropriate for them? Of course, colleges are not all the same. This isn't like kindergarten or elementary school. Different colleges have different specialities, they have different professors, they have different cultures to them. Of course, many of them have been infected by woke culture, but not every college is appropriate for every student, and every potential student wouldn't necessarily know which college is appropriate for them. Getting rid of this testing is a terrible idea. Becky Pringle, NEA president, said this, Quote, all students deserve and have the ability to demonstrate knowledge in many ways that are measurable by those who know them best, their educators. If students do not take standardized tests, they cannot demonstrate that they can pass certain kinds of curriculum and that they can be successful in their college environment. These programs are literally ruining these kids' lives. From bestcolleges.com, new study suggests elite colleges should reinstate SAT and ACT scores. The pandemic provided top colleges an opportunity to evaluate admissions without standardized tests should they go back to their old ways. A Harvard-based study says high standardized test scores equate to greater academic success at Ivy Plus colleges. By contrast, high school GPAs have less predictive power. Most highly selective colleges, such as elite schools, Ivy League schools, remain temporarily test optional. Emphasizing test scores can impede efforts to maintain economic and racial diversity. So you might affect the racial diversity if you don't let everyone into the school. The argument is, accept grade point average ratings from high schools, not standardized tests. But the standardized tests are not discriminatory. Sometimes they like to say they are. They're not. They're standard. They're what you need to function in society. A high GPA, a high grade point average, is something you can give students at different high schools with total discretion by the teachers. Not 100% discretion in most cases, but in too many cases, a student that might get a high GPA score in one environment might do terribly in another high school where they would actually be challenged by other students. Well, that's the real world. At some point, people do have to exist in the real world. They can't keep degrading society by not allowing people to be competitive and move forward based on merit. It doesn't matter why people didn't get the opportunity. If they didn't get the opportunity and it's not fair, sometimes life isn't fair. And the people that are telling us, oh, we can make life fair, we'll just take down standards and remove standards. The only thing you can do is destroy society so that no one can accomplish anything. When the COVID pandemic upended higher education in 2020, one of the monumental changes was the widespread suspension of standardized testing. Today, more than 1,900 colleges and universities remain test optional. Of those, 84 are test blind, meaning that not only don't they require scores, but also won't consider them if submitted. Even the most highly selective colleges, for the most part, have been reluctant to reinstate standardized test requirements. New evidence, however, suggests they might want to rethink their policies. Standardized test scores are more predictive than grades. A new study from Opportunity Insights, a research group based at Harvard University, says standardized test scores have more predictive power for academic success in college than high school grade point averages do, particularly at highly selective institutions. Can you even just think about this for 1 second? And if you send someone to a school and that person basically, even with giving them some additional help and being easy on their grading, which a lot of colleges are doing to support diversity, but even so, people will flunk out if they can't function at these elite institutions. These are really the toughest institutions. If they flunk out, that could be the end of their life. They're not considering that in pushing this diversity stuff, they're ruining people's lives at the same time they're ruining American culture. Using admissions records and first-year grades from several Ivy Plus colleges between 2017 and 2022, the group determined that keeping all variables equal, students who scored highest on their SATs and ACTs earned college GPAs 0.43 points higher than those with more modest scores. This is the same group that made a splash last summer when it revealed the extent to which students from wealthy families have a better chance of admission to Ivy Plus colleges. Among applicants with the same SAT or ACT scores, students with the wealthiest 0.1% of families were more than twice as likely to get accepted. Those same students were almost 15 times more likely than other students to achieve a score of 1,500 or better on the SAT. 1,500 is a pretty good score. By contrast, the study noted, high school GPAs do little to predict academic success in college. Perhaps that's due in part to the rampant grade inflation that's been plaguing schools over the past decade. What's grade inflation? From Forbes.com, grade inflation is not a victimless crime. America's high schools have endured a decade of dramatic grade inflation, according to a new study from ACT. This coincided with a decade of declining academic achievement, raising hard questions for those concerned about instructional rigor, inflated graduation rates, and the integrity of selective college admissions. This is giving students grades that they don't deserve, to push them forward to the next grade or to push them into a college that they don't belong in. It's very destructive for students and, of course, destructive for society, and totally unfair to students that earn legitimate grades. The authors also found no evidence that wealthier students outperform low-income students with similar test scores. Their college GPAs were, quote, virtually identical. When controlled for race and gender, along with first-generation and legacy status, the results were the same. Academic performance aligns more with test scores than with grades. At the same time, the study's authors didn't dismiss the advantages wealthier students have when it comes to standardized testing. Quote, it is important to acknowledge that students from low-income families and other less advantaged backgrounds have lower standardized test scores and are less likely to take the test than students from higher-income families. This fact is consistent with those presented above because of disparities experienced throughout childhood, including differences in school quality, neighborhood exposure, and many other environmental conditions. Most elite colleges remain test optional. This study comes as most highly competitive colleges remain on the fence regarding standardized testing. Among the Ivy Plus schools, the Ivy League plus the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Duke University, Stanford University, and the University of Chicago, only MIT has reinstated the test requirement. Columbia made headlines last year when it announced it would remain test optional permanently, becoming the first Ivy League school to plant that stake in the ground. The University of Chicago went test optional in 2018, just before the pandemic forced such decisions. MIT says its policy change promotes opportunity and inclusion and isn't simply a tool for weeding out applicants who fall short of their lofty quantitative standards. Quote, our research shows that standardized tests help us better assess the academic preparedness of all applicants and also help us identify socioeconomically disadvantaged students who lack access to advanced coursework or other enrichment opportunities that would otherwise demonstrate their readiness for MIT. The Institute wrote in a statement, we believe a requirement is more equitable and transparent than a test optional policy. Its Cambridge neighbor, Harvard, will remain test optional at least until the class of 2031 applies. Meanwhile, highly competitive schools in the University of California system, such as Berkeley and UCLA, are test blind, thanks to the system's policy change in 2021. The Cal State system followed suit shortly thereafter. And in stark contrast to arch rival MIT, Caltech is test-free through at least 2025. Quote, Caltech does not consider SAT or ACT testing, its website states. Don't send it, we won't see it. Could this study's findings sway those elite colleges still considering whether to reinstate standardized tests? On one hand, proof that test scores accurately predict success in college, judging by first-year grades at any rate, GPAs lends validity to the test itself and credibility to the argument in favor of resuming test requirements. On the other hand, emphasizing test scores and striving to enroll an economically and racially diverse student body can be mutually exclusive. A 2015 College Board analysis determined students from families earning less than $20,000 scored lowest on the SAT. Learners from families earning more than $200,000 scored highest. Wealthier students often benefit from expensive test prep services designed to boost scores, an advantage even the College Board acknowledges. What's more, standardized tests have long been accused of racial bias, a claim affirmed in 2010 by the Harvard Educational Review. Quote, the confirmation of unfair test results throws into question the validity of the test and consequently all decisions based on its results. All admissions decisions based exclusively or predominantly on SAT performance appear to be biased against the African American minority group. When the pandemic hit and selective colleges suspended test requirements, more low-income and underrepresented minority students applied to selective colleges and enrolled, following pre-pandemic patterns established among test-optional institutions. And when they say selective colleges, they're talking about Ivy League's elite schools. In a 2021 American Educational Research Journal article, Christopher Bennett noted that the adoption of test-optional policies at selective private institutions from 2005 to 2016 resulted in a first-time enrollment increase of 3 to 4% for Pell Grant recipients and of 10 to 12% for Black, Latino, and Native American students. Another study titled, quote, Defining Access, How Test Optional Works, examined 28 public and private test optional colleges. The authors found that almost all institutions saw an increase in underrepresented minority applicants after going test optional. Of all schools involved in the study, 2/3 saw a rise in enrollment among this group. This phenomenon applies to highly selective colleges as well. When the University of Chicago announced its test optional decision, James Nondorf, the university's dean of admissions and vice president of enrollment and student advancement, said the move levels the playing field for first-generation and low-income students. But will test optional policies become permanent, given the controversy around testing bias and the democratizing effects of test optional policies? Will colleges forever abandon their reliance on the SAT and ACT? Some think they should. At UCLA, admissions officials say eliminating the SAT has had little impact on their ability to assess students. But of course they would, because they're in California. They're all into this stuff. They instead focus more on high school grades and class rank. How does that help them dealing with grade inflation? They're putting people into positions that they're not going to succeed at. And there may be a big allowance for that over the next 5 years, even over the next 10 years. But eventually, these people are going to get wiped out of their jobs. They're going to lose their careers. It's not good. People should always work hard, earn their way based on merit, and then move up. Whatever level you're at, you can always move up higher. But it's dehumanizing to take merit out of the equation. Speaking about high school grades, quote, those factors are sufficient to make a decision. UCLA's vice provost for enrollment management told the Los Angeles Times, I hope this is a new wave of the future for lots of institutions. Others aren't so sure. Even the test optional University of Chicago believes standardized tests add value to the admissions process. It tells applicants that because, quote, one school can be very different from another, it is sometimes useful to see evidence of academic achievement that exists outside the context of your school. The university encourages students who have taken the SAT or ACT to submit their scores if they think the results reflect their ability and potential. Of course, students scoring well on the tests are more likely to submit scores to boost their chances of admission. Perhaps that's why the Opportunity Insight study found that students opting not to submit scores achieve relatively lower college GPAs. As Ivy Plus and other elite colleges consider the future of the SAT and ACT, this new study offers a strong endorsement in favor of reinstatement, suggesting that, quote, standardized test scores may have more value for admission processes than previously understood in the literature, especially for highly selective colleges. Yet this endorsement might fail to convince admissions offices already struggling to maintain diversity in light of the Supreme Court's ban on race-conscious admissions. Despite their predictive power, if standardized tests constitute one more barrier underrepresented students must overcome, the chances that selective colleges reinstate test requirements could remain slim. And as politicians and watchdog groups such as Students for Fair Admissions, the plaintiff in the landmark Supreme Court case, that would be Edward Blum, continue to scrutinize elite colleges for evidence of racial preferences, standardized tests offer a quantifiable way critics can claim discrimination. Because it is discrimination. These people are creating so much damage in society to individuals' futures. It's incredible. Quote, they can say, why did you admit this kid of one race who has a 1400 when you rejected this kid of another race who has a 1500? Said the New York Times' David Leonhardt on the podcast The Daily. But whereas a system without standardized tests is just fuzzier, it's more subjective, and it potentially creates less legal jeopardy for colleges. And it's less legal jeopardy for colleges because colleges will get sued when they admit students based on their race or their gender or their sexual preferences, which of course they should be sued for that. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.